There's nothing in the world that would not be possible to collect. Do you not agree? It is just a question of desire and money for acquiring exhibits. Ukrainian collectors are truly insatiable and are always in search of or waiting for new objects. In the Generation UA program, true connoisseurs of their work will talk about a creative process that requires a certain amount of patience, skills, and knowledge.
Коллекционирование – это не всегда осмысленно, но со временем.
Collecting is not always meaningful, but over time it mostly comes down to comprehension and applying a certain strategy. It's about gathering small or large objects on one subject or another, or from a certain historical period or boundary in time. It all started back in school with my passion for history. This is still inside me, and while I was still in elementary school and then in high school, I became interested in collecting objects of certain topics and from a particular historical period. I collected for a long time, I read a lot, but then I probably had some kind of insight and I suddenly departed from those interesting times of my youth. I turned to another hobby that became more interesting and peculiar than anything ever before. I started because I was fascinated by history. I was interested in the period of World War II, collecting artifacts of this period. Oddly enough, and for some strange reason, these are German artifacts, and there are plenty of them that were left behind in Ukrainian soil. For me, these became the most interesting objects to collect. After about 5 years of such stubborn gathering, I began engaging in art and modernity. This is the end of the 19th and beginning of the 20th centuries, a turning point not only in the historical, but also the turning of some moral social key. This style just fascinates me. I'm crazy about it, and as a result I had to find a particular object that would express this style very clearly. For me, these became old photo frames. Due to the fact that this period had shown a lot of photo studios and a kind of fashion for photography, it became prestigious. Before, it was available only for the nobility and well-to-do people. But the development of certain economic and mechanical processes in society led to the fact that photography became a highly popular pastime for many people. Photo equipment was made, technologies were developed, cameras were made, and photo shops were opened everywhere. Kyiv was no exception to the rule. Naturally, where there is a photograph, there must be a suitable frame. An interesting process of hanging antiques on a wall. The walls are shaking, and sometimes so are your hands. This is my favorite frame. Choosing the right frame for a photograph sometimes takes a bit of time. Well, perhaps this one will do. Philately appeared and began to develop in the middle of the 19th century. By the end of the 19th century, there were the first mentions of people who started collecting postage stamps on envelopes. In fact, that was when the first letter inside an envelope appeared. Philatelists are people who became obsessed with collecting symbols of payment for postage purely as a hobby. These items include stamps, envelopes, postcards, and various other postal items. This is a very interesting hobby that is all over the world, in Europe, Asia, and the US. Today, there are many philately clubs in Europe, in particular in France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. I started collecting postal stamps when I met my future husband. He began collecting postal stamps of CIS countries, Ukraine and other republics of the former Soviet Union. When I met him, he showed me all these stamps, told me in detail about the peculiarities, and actually fascinated me in this hobby. I was truly fascinated by the fact that this world is very diverse. You can collect stamps on different themes and the chronology of history. Our country is young. Since 1992, it has been producing postage stamps of Ukraine. It is a stardom of our new history, which everyone can join in, and I am one of those people. For about 100 years, people have been creating stories and printing books, and a whole mythology has already been created. And I still don't know a lot about this world. I, as a person who loves everything new and interesting, have completely plunged into it and have been engaged in drawing comics for 4 years. How did I come to comics? It happened about 4 years ago, quite by accident. It went from my other hobby. I was addicted to board games before I discovered comics. I have a small collection of about 20 games. At one of the forums where people exchange games and sell them, I agreed to exchange mine with another fellow. But since my game was more expensive, he told me, "Let me give you some comic books to cover the difference." I almost never experienced this before. I was interested, and that is how the very first comic book ended up in my hands. Most people who collect comics can be divided into two types. Those who collect original comic books published in English and are brought from the US or England, and those who collect translated publications. I collect the originals. In Ukraine, there are very few collectors who collect only the original versions of comic books. You learn something new. For example, when the stamps are released on the occasion of significant historical events, you start to take an interest in this hobby. Look, and what kind of stamp is this? And why was it issued? For what event? You begin to study this event and you begin to find out some new facts. Stamps are issued in singles and in series, in small sheets, in blocks, in booklets, in various variations. Stamps are issued on very different subjects. They are dedicated to famous personalities, actors, opera singers, architecture of Ukraine, historical events, and life stories. This year, a stamp was issued in commemoration of the 300th anniversary of the birth of the Austrian Empress Maria Theresa. In this issue, 5 countries participated: Ukraine, Slovenia, Croatia, Hungary, and Austria. It was a very interesting issue for many collectors from a historical point of view. It all starts with so-called singles. These are small magazines that are issued every month in the US. One story consists, for example, of 5 such magazines. Then, when the story ends, they are collected in a soft cover or in a hard cover. Then, if this particular comic becomes very popular, it is reprinted in an enlarged format. This is what collectors call the limited or deluxe edition. This comic book is even larger and is issued in a special slipcase with a bookmark. Such editions are truly for genuine, die-hard comic book collectors all over the world. As soon as I see a frame in the Art Nouveau style, I know and understand that I do not have it. So I must have it in my collection. At the moment, I have about 300 copies in my collection, but frankly, I have not counted them for quite some time, and I would like to believe that there are already more than 300 of them. A certain number of them are still being restored, and when they are ready in their final appearance, there will obviously be more of them. All this began in 2008, when I bought 2 photo frames on the Andriivsky descent in the old Kiev district of Postal. In my opinion, each one in the collection is quite unique. But the more you engage in this, the more you get interested in learning this style. Visiting certain flea markets or antique shops in Europe and the world, you understand that somewhere there are copies, somewhere there are reproductions, and somewhere there are 2 originals produced in the same studio. This frame was made in the typically laconic style of the early 1920s. I bought it at a flea market in Budapest and brought it home to Ukraine. Budapest has an incredibly wide variety of antique shops, and there is also a very cool flea market there. Collectors must find time for treatment and restoration of their favorite frames, seeing as many of them are still not hanging on the wall. They need to be done. That is also a good creative event, not only hanging them on the walls, but also recreating their textures and restoring them in every possible way, because nothing lasts forever under the moonlight. Sometimes, of course, I acquire items that are in a very poor condition. But if I see that I do not have this frame, but it needs some emergency restoration, for me this is not an obstacle at all. I will definitely take it and restore it to perfection. It is very difficult to describe my collection, as it is constantly grows, or I throw out some objects from my collection that I obviously see cannot be restored. Mostly these are postage stamps of Ukraine in their chronological order. I really like stamps of different forms and materials. Such stamps exist. I have such a collection which consists of very many brands, subjects, countries. For example, someone likes to collect on the theme of railway transport. Some like to collect stamps with sports heroes. Some like collecting stamps on the chronology of Ukraine from 1992 to the present day. Someone else likes to collect stamps of unusual shapes. Someone in Africa or someone in Europe. I do not have any favorite themes of stamps so far because by philatelist standards, I have not been doing this for that long, and it is still a difficult task for me to determine the list of those things that I like the most. My collection is constantly growing, so I do not have clear numbers in my head when it relates to singles. I have about 1,000 of them, and if we're talking about all the other collections in a soft cover, to be sure, the premium editions, there are approximately 600 comic books. How do I choose books for my collection? What do I buy? In the beginning, when you start collecting comic books, you go with what you know. Since childhood, I've loved Batman movies with Jack Nicholson. He was my favorite. Since then, I fell in love with him and with all the Batman cartoons and the Hollywood movie series with Batman. For this reason, the first comic books I bought were about Batman and keepers. But after that, you begin to discover that there are other comics on the market. There are independent comics, and there is even a European school of comics, but it still remains the most interesting and exciting hobby for me, and even more so with time. Now I continue to collect characters that are interesting for me, but I switched more to independent publishers. Over all the years I've been collecting, I have run across different publications. I have, for example, something that just everyone recognized immediately. These are films by director Darren Aronofsky, Nouveau, Black Swan, and Requiem for a Dream. The association is that he is an avid fan of comic books, and he created comic books especially for his films. For example, the comic book Noah is a limited edition. There were only 200 units released worldwide. It comes in a slipcase with the signature of Darren Aronofsky and other creators, and it is numbered. This edition is quite rare and quite expensive. I also have a comic book by Dave McKean. Out of 450 copies around the world, I have the 8th copy. I also have singles with the author's signature. There are many copies of them. I'm a member of the Philatelic Club of Ukraine. Every Saturday, meetings are held in the Institute of Physical Education, where you can add to your collection, help other correspondents with whom I work, and cooperate to supplement their collections on their preferred themes. So-called joint releases are very popular in the world. This is when different countries produce postage stamps together on the same subject or theme. This circle of contacts is massive and is constantly expanding, as the world of philately is diverse, and every day some country produces and issues new stamps, new blocks, new envelopes, and new cards. Certain resources are great. After all, we're living in the 21st century. It's all about online auctions and so on. Another part is replenished in antique shops and flea markets. Once a month in Kiev, there is a big antique event. It is called an antique club or a rally. This is when photo frame collectors and dealers from all over Ukraine gather in one venue. Of course, I find a lot for myself there. Some objects are given to me as a gift. Though this happens quite rarely, it is pleasant. But more often than not, I have to pull cash out of my own pocket to pay for a particular object of interest to me. Knowing or assuming that I will go abroad, first of all, I will find out the work schedule of local flea markets, the locations of antique shops, salons, and, of course, if time and money permitting, I will definitely travel there to find something new for my collection.
Окажусь там.
I created my group in social networks, where I started selling only that which I no longer needed. Eventually, this venture grew into a small store and even turned into a certain community, where the collectors of original comic books gather. We discuss the latest releases, and I even wrote news on topics of comics that are interesting for me, and even some articles. That was the way the Comics Club was born. We meet in Kyiv, discuss comics, I sometimes read lectures, we watch films, and discuss different comics festivals. It's such a clubbish set of common interests, like a big family of comics fanatics. You know, it seems to me that there is a growing interest in collectors, as there is to some sort of a subcultural trend in humanity as a particular branch of activity. In fact, it is quite a closed sphere, and in a way it is made up of a very introverted cohort of people. I think they're out there somewhere, and they also think that someone is out there somewhere. We all meet in antique meetings, wink at each other, and know that we are in the same boat of collectors of photo frames.
Мы из одного.